Hey church family, I hope that you and your family are doing well as we continue to go through this season of physical distancing and as we continue to wade into the waters, the uncharted waters of what we have come to call coronavirus. I wanted to take a few minutes and speak with you today about some decisions that we have made regarding our operations in our church office as well as our church ministries and meetings. We have in this month of April been under the executive order from our governor related to shelter in place or stay at home directives for non-essential business. Also in the month of April, we have been following the guidelines from the coronavirus task force in the White House, which initially in March gave us 15 days to slow the spread, and then in April announced that we would continue that of physical distancing throughout the month of April to slow the spread of COVID-19. Here we are towards the end of April. Next week we will end this month and move into May. And so it was a good time for us to give you an update and also to make some decisions going forward. When we first started this process back in March, we were making and announcing decisions on a week-to-week basis. Then with the recommendations from the task force regarding social distancing or physical distancing, and with the governor's executive order, we made decisions related to the entire month of April. So now we kind of have circled back around to where we are prepared to engage once again in making weekly announcements of decisions. Now there are a lot of details that we may not have figured out. We don't have any dates figured out perfectly. We really don't even have any guesses as to dates figured out, but we do have a basic framework that's going to inform our decisions and what will happen when we get to each point in this process. And so I spent some time thinking through this process, and then as our staff met this week, I shared this plan with them. We discussed it and they were on board with that. And then last night I had a Zoom meeting with our deacons and our trustees in which I shared this plan with them and received some good input from them and some recommendations on some specifics that we'll get to as we move through this process in the weeks to come. But they were on board with proceeding with this plan as well. So let's talk for a couple of minutes about really two broad aspects. One is what I've called the church office. That would be this building where I'm sitting right now, where our support staff and ministry staff, the base from which we operate. That'll take just a couple minutes to share the info with you on that. And then we'll spend the rest of our time, most of our time, talking about church operations. And by church operations, I'm referring to ministries and meetings that take place here on campus. So let's first think about church office, the place where I'm sitting right now, where our ministry staff and support staff, the base from which we operate. This church office has been closed through the month of April. Our ministry staff has been coming in daily, but we felt it would be most prudent for us to close down the front office to limit access to that from the general public, and to allow those employees to go home to do some work as they were able to from home for their jobs, and just to take this month to see how things would go with the spread of COVID-19. We are coming to the end of that time, and I can report to you that our plan as of right now is to reopen our offices, to fully reopen them on Monday, May the 4th. Okay, it's Monday, May the 4th, we will reopen our offices. Now, let me be sure that I share with you that even though we're reopening those offices, there will be some things that are quite different. We are asking that if any communication, any decisions that you need to discuss with staff, if those can be handled via email or telephone, that is preferred. It's not that we don't want to see you, but it's that we want to have limited interactions with face-to-face in this confined space of this office. So if you absolutely need to see a staff member, by all means, we want you to be able to see us, and we will make ourselves available to you. But we really want you to try to make that appointment in advance. That's a good business practice at any time, but especially now, because it will allow us to control the number of people who are coming into our office building. Of course, most of our offices are in the back of our office building. We have a front office where our secretaries, our administrative assistants are, and that front office, again, will be open on May 4th. However, only 3 people will be allowed into our lobby at a time. Okay, so only 3 people can be in that lobby at a time. We will have 3 spots clearly marked on the floor in our lobby that will allow the appropriate physical distancing to occur. And so when someone comes into the front lobby of our office, they will be asked to stand in one of those spots. In addition, there will be a supply of face masks in the front office, and we will require anyone who is in the front office waiting to speak to someone to wear a mask while they are there. That is both for the protection of those who are in the front lobby, and that is for the protection of our staff who will be dealing with them face to face on a daily basis. So again, that office is reopening on Monday, May the 4th, with those limitations, those changes that we have made. That handles the church office. Now I want us to talk about the church operations, which involves various headings that I've tried to be very meticulous in the notes I've made, and I'll look to them quite often to make sure I'm communicating to you what needs to be communicated. We are going to use a phased approach to re-entry for our church operations, our ministries, and our meetings. That is, we're going to borrow the language from the coronavirus task force of the White House. We're going to borrow their language, and we're going to use some metrics that are local to us to help guide us through that. Let me try to explain that to you in this way. If you would, for all intents and purposes, right now, as of today, April the 23rd, we are in what I'm calling stage 0. Okay, stage 0. In stage 0, which is where we are right now, as long as we're in stage 0, our church campus is closed, and the only services we have are online worship Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Okay, again, stage 0, which is where we are right now. Stage 0, our church campus is closed, and the only activities that we are providing on campus is an online only worship experience. I will be here on Sunday mornings, live and in real time, as will Kenneth and our praise team and the audiovisual team in the upstairs part of the building, in the balcony, and we'll be providing that service at 10:30 a.m. as we have been all through the month of April. Stage 0 is just us repeating what we have been doing all during the month of April. Okay, that is stage 0. Now after this, there are 3 more stages. There's a stage 0, a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Basically, stages 1 and 2 are going to be the same implications for us here at church. It's just where we don't want to get things confused with using different stages from what the coronavirus task force used. We're using their guidelines to help us think through how to do that here. So let me tell you how we get from one stage to the next. Okay, we're in stage 0. In order to get from stage 0 to stage 1, we need to see a downward trend of reported coronavirus cases in our community. I know that was a lot of choppy, alliterated words, so let me repeat that. In order to move from one stage to the next, from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, we need to see in each stage, we need to see a 14-day period in which the number of reported coronavirus cases in our area is on a downward trajectory. Now, we're not going to use the numbers for the entire state of Florida because Florida is a large state. It's a very diverse state. what's going on, say, from Orlando down south is much different than what's happening from Tallahassee to Pensacola here in the Panhandle where we are. It's just a different context. They're dealing with different things than we are. And so the data we're going to use is that we're going to, on a daily basis, I'll be consulting the Department of Health for the state of Florida, their dashboard on their website. And on that website, we have access to the number of reported cases, not only statewide, but per county. And so what we will start doing, and we already have been doing, I've already been doing this, but I'll continue to do that and take note of the trends, is we will note each day the combined number of cases with 3 counties. Escambia, which is immediately 2 hours west, Santa Rosa County, which is right here where we are, and Okaloosa County, which is immediately 2 hours east. Okay, those 3 counties, we will look at the total number of reported coronavirus cases and confirmed in those counties. And once we see a 2-week period of the number of those cases trending downward, that will move us from phase 0 to phase 1. When we get to phase 1, in order to get to phase 2, we are going to need to see again a 2-week pattern trend downward, decreased number of cases in those 3 counties combined. That gets us out of stage 1 into stage 2. How do we get from stage 2 to stage 3? Again, another 2 weeks of the downward trajectory of those cases. That takes us into stage 3. And we think that by the time we get to stage 3, that we will have things pretty close to normal. Now that doesn't mean that, okay, 2 to get to here, 2 to get to there, 2 to that doesn't mean 6 weeks is back to normal. It could take 4 weeks before you see a 2-week trajectory. That's why we're not giving dates to any of this. We're just saying when we get to those phases, we will then need to see a 2-week pattern of downward trend. If we have a 10-day pattern, then an uptick for 5 days, then we have to go through another. We need the whole 2 weeks of a downward trend. I hope that's making sense, as to say it's not just 2 weeks per stage or phase. It is 2 weeks of a downward trend. Okay, so if we are in phase 0, what does it mean when we get to phase 1? And let me share with you how that will work. But before I even share that, let me be sure that I make this statement, that in all of these phases, and again, this is using language from the Coronavirus Task Force from the White House, in phase 1 and phase 2, both of those phases, vulnerable individuals are encouraged to stay home. Okay, just because we open up an opportunity here on campus, on site, doesn't mean you have to be here or you're going to be found unfaithful. Okay, not at all. If you have any concerns about returning to public sphere too early, stay home. In fact, if you are a vulnerable individual, and the way that the task force, now don't shoot the messenger, I'm using their language. They define a vulnerable individual as an elderly person. That's almost saying, that's how they define it, an elderly person or someone who has an underlying health condition like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, a chronic lung disease, someone with an underlying physical, if you've gone through chemotherapy lately or radiation treatments like that, those can be considered underlying health reasons. So if you are elderly or if you have an underlying health reason, you are considered to be a vulnerable individual. And in stage 1 and stage 2, especially stage 0, because we're not doing anything on site, we start to do that in stage or phase 1 and phase 2. But even when we get there, if you are a vulnerable individual, phase 1, phase 2, you are encouraged to stay home to avoid public gatherings. If you decide, another disclaimer before we look at specifics, if you decide to take advantage of an opportunity, anywhere, not just here, but if you decide to go to the store or to come here to a worship service, once we get to that point, we want to encourage you to take the proper precautions. If you have a mask, consider wearing it. We're not going to have a special section for mask wearers to sit. It doesn't mean you have leprosy, okay? Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid to wear those masks. So that's for your benefit, the benefit of others. And again, that's not just if you decide to come here. It's if you go out anywhere. We would encourage you to do that. I haven't been as faithful and to do that as I should, but I certainly would desire that, would hope that you would do that as well. So take the proper precautions. And again, if you are worried about your health, then by all means, please remain home. We're going to continue to provide online worship as we have this entire time. So please continue to remain at home if you're worried and concerned about your health. Now, what's going to happen? Let's talk first about Sunday morning worship. Okay, Sunday morning worship. As of today, April 23rd, we are in stage 0. So before we get to stage 1, we have to see 14 days back to back consecutive of a downward trend. Well, we're not there. In fact, we had a little uptick a couple of days ago in this area. So we are at least 14 days from at least. I'm not saying we are 14 days. We are at least 14 days from being able to move out of phase or stage 0. So while we're in stage 0, that means that there are no on-site gatherings that are taking place on our church campus this weekend. We have yet to sustain a 14-day period in which the number of reported cases in this Tri-County area has decreased. Okay? And since, listen closely, since a 14-day period of decreased cases, even if it started today, if we had 14 days consecutively, that would take us beyond May the 3rd. So this is where we talk about making decisions a week in advance. We are going ahead and making the decision now to announce that our service on Sunday, May the 3rd, will also be online only at 10:30 a.m. So take note, for the next 2 Sundays, April 26th and May 3rd, our church campus, the campus, will remain closed. We will only worship online on Sundays at 10:30 a.m. We're not going to make a decision about May 10th until around this time next week, and we'll announce that decision through email and Facebook as soon as we make it. Okay, we're returning to making those decisions and announcing them on a week-to-week basis. Now, let's turn our attention, since we're talking about Sunday morning worship, let's turn our attention to what will happen when we finally experience a 14-day period of decline in reported cases and we move to phase 1 and then on to phase 2. Now, again, as I reminded you earlier, remember to note that the task force defines vulnerable individuals a certain way, and if you fall into that category, even in phase 1 and phase 2, we encourage you to remain home until we get to phase 3. But when we reach the point of moving from phase 1 to phase 0, that's when you'll see a little bit of change. Now be sure to note as well that the language that the task force uses in explaining phase 1 and phase 2 is very similar. They actually talk about churches. For example, I have the language right in front of me. The guidelines specifically mention these places of worship, which will obviously include a church service, and it classifies, their recommendation classifies worship gatherings, church services, as a, quote, large venue. Okay, the guidance for phase 1 from the task force reads as follows, quote, large venues can operate under strict physical distancing protocols, end quote. Okay, the guidance in phase 2 is very similar. It just replaces the word strict with moderate. The guidance in phase 2 regarding church services reads as follows, quote, large venues can operate under moderate physical distancing, end quote. So very little difference between the wording used in phase 1 and phase 2. And because of that minor difference, we are treating phase 1 and phase 2 in the same way. That is, whatever is applicable in phase 1 will also be applicable in phase 2. Okay, so we get to the point to where we move from phase 0 to phase 1. What happens when we get to phase 1? And we'll tell you when we're there, but what happens when we get to phase 1? Regarding our Sunday morning worship, what happens when we get to phase 1 is that we continue to provide online worship as we have this entire time, but we also resume on-site morning worship with physical distancing protocols in place. Okay, so note, this is morning worship only that resumes on site, and we are implementing in stages 1 and stage 2, we are implementing physical distancing protocols. Okay, our plan is simple. When we resume on-site worship in phase 1, and as we continue on-site worship in phase 2, we're going to practice physical distancing so we will not be packed on the same pew as we normally would. In fact, these are some of the specifics that we will figure out in the next couple of days, because we realize we've got a couple of weeks to figure it out. We will certainly have at least one pew between each pew that has people. Like there'll be a pew where people are sitting, there'll be an empty pew behind them, a pew where at least one empty pew between congregants. Families, we will encourage families to sit together since you're already in the same house anyway. Now, if your family is not in the same house, or by extended family, we don't want you to come from 4 different houses and sit on the same pew, packed in tight with each other. But households those households can sit together, but we will be spreading other people apart, and how we sit will not be crammed on the one pew, and we'll have guidance there the day of when all this is happening. We'll have guidance for people to show you where to sit, okay? So that's what's going to take place. We're not going to be packed on a pew as we normally would. Seating capacity is obviously going to be drastically decreased during phase 1 and phase 2. We don't know what that number is right now, but we know it's drastically decreased. So for that reason, since it's not going to take very long to fill up the sanctuary as we're physical distancing, for that reason, we plan to open up 2 overflow areas, and we will seat people there and practice physical distancing there. We'll use Bamberg Chapel, and then we'll use the FLC. We will live stream the service from the sanctuary into those 2 locations. Let's say, and again, these are not scientific numbers. I'm just using a simple number for illustrative purposes. Let's say that the physical distanced seating capacity in our sanctuary is 200 people. Once 200 people are in the sanctuary, we will then direct people to Bamberg Chapel to watch a live stream of the service. Once the number of people is maxed out in Bamberg Chapel, when it reaches capacity, we will then direct people to the Family Life Center to watch broadcast of the service in real time. It's our belief that between those 3 buildings, we can accommodate church members and our guests in a self-physically distanced way. So that is Sunday morning worship in phases 1 and 2. Connected to our Sunday morning worship, we have a nursery and preschool worship. So let's talk about that for a moment. I want you to note that during phase 1 and phase 2, we will not be able to provide a nursery or preschool worship during the on-site morning worship in phase 1 and phase 2. It is simply impossible to practice physical distancing in smaller rooms. So again, no nursery and preschool worship during phase 1 and phase 2. Now, once we enter phase 3, we intend to be back to quote-unquote normal operations for Sunday morning. That would include on-site connection groups at 9:15. That would include on-site morning worship with everyone in the sanctuary at 10:30 a.m. That's going to include an operational nursery and resuming preschool worship. Again, this is once we enter phase 3, and we're going to give you as much advance notice about that as possible as to when that will occur. So that kind of looks at what happens on Sunday morning in the worship time. Let's think now about some other things that happen on Sundays. Specifically on Sunday morning, we have connection groups or Sunday schools classes. It is, again, difficult, if not impossible, to physically distance a small group in a small room. And we're going to be using the larger rooms on campus as overflow sites. Therefore, during phase 1 and phase 2, our connection groups will not meet on site. Now, we will be contacting our connection group leaders, our teachers, to give them some guidance for continuing to meet in a virtual format during phase 1 and phase 2. That might involve moving the meeting time for a connection group to Sunday evening. That might mean starting a half hour earlier on Sunday morning. That might mean using a different day of the week. If you're involved in a connection group, your teacher, we will ask your teacher to be in contact with you very soon regarding any changes to your schedule once we get into phase 1 and phase 2. So that discusses the connection groups, our Sunday school. Let's also talk about Sunday evening activities for just a moment. I know that a small percentage of you compared to our entire church are involved on Sunday evening with Sunday evening's activities. In phase 1 and in phase 2, there will be no Sunday evening service or activities. Now, summer is soon going to be here, and during the summer, or at least over the past few years, during the summer, we tend to have a much more relaxed Sunday evening schedule. So due to all the variables that we're looking at, due to not knowing the timing in which we're going to enter these phases of re-entry, we have determined to go ahead and make the decision to postpone regular Sunday evening activities and gatherings throughout the summer. Okay, so that means all the summer months, taking us through June, July, August. Sunday evenings we are temporarily postponing. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't have a special service here and there. We may very well do that. In fact, we may have some things rolling around in our head right now about that. But we'll announce that as we get closer to them. But as we wait and see how quickly we get into these phases or how slowly we get into these phases. But on the whole, we want you to know that Sunday evening will not be convening on site. There may be some other things happening, like connection groups may decide to meet on Sunday evening, but nothing on site during phase 1 and phase 2. And also, we're going ahead and making that call to extend that throughout the summer. No Sunday evening activities. Let's talk about Wednesday night. Wednesday night involves a lot of activities with various groups. We have 5 different adult Bible study groups that meet on Wednesday night, as well as our students and our children and preschoolers, and we have a nursery. We also have a big meal on Wednesday nights, and of course all of that is being impacted by coronavirus. So regarding midweek services and the Wednesday night meal, let me make a few comments on that. During phase 1 and phase 2, our midweek activities will not meet on site. Again, it is impossible to physically distance the groups we have on Wednesday evening in the spaces we have available. So during phase 1 and phase 2, okay, we're in phase 0. We'll announce when we get to these different phases. During phase 1 and phase 2, no midweek meetings on site. Now, if we see that we're going to be in phase 2 for an extended period of time, we will likely consider adding a midweek worship service for the entire family. But we'll make that announcement if that's the decision we make. If we see we're going to be there an extended period of time, we'll make that announcement as soon as we possibly can. Also, let's think about the Wednesday night meal. It is impossible to physically distance in our midweek meal setup. We just can't do it in the space that we have. I know that many of us enjoy sharing a meal together each Wednesday evening, and while we believe that we will at some point be able to do that again, right now our situation is not conducive for that to occur. Additionally, something you probably don't know is that just before we began to close our on-site activities, our long-range planning committee was actually looking at gathering and formulating some recommendations related to upgrading our kitchen facilities. They've been talking, and we've been getting feedback from leadership there. So hopefully that committee can soon begin to maybe virtually meet in a way that would allow them to pick up those discussions where they left off about that plan. Taking all of that into consideration, here's the announcement we're making about Wednesday night meals. All things considered, our plan moving forward is to postpone the Wednesday evening meal throughout the summer. Okay, Wednesday evening meal throughout the summer. Obviously, phase 1 and phase 2, but also throughout the remainder of the summer. Now, what about other groups that are meeting? We have other groups that use our campus during the week. Senior adult aerobics, Tuesday morning Bible study, grief share, etc. We have some other groups like 55 Plus that meet monthly here on our church campus. With all of these groups during phase 1 and phase 2, these groups will not meet on site. Okay, so no other group activity on site. Basically, during phase 1 and phase 2, the campus is opening up for Sunday morning worship only. Okay, so no other groups will be meeting during phase 1 and phase 2. Well, let's talk about the summer for a moment. One of our last things to cover. Summer is a busy time here at the church. The coronavirus has obviously impacted a lot of summer plans. Some of our scheduled activities have already been impacted. Others we're still waiting to make the call on a few other things to see if they'll take place as originally planned. We can, however, make a few announcements related to our summer schedule. One announcement we can make is this. Lifeway has canceled all of their June camps. Therefore, the mission trip our middle schoolers had planned to Mobile, Alabama, it was a Lifeway camp. That trip has been canceled. Additionally, I was scheduled to attend our Southern Baptist Convention in Orlando later in the month of June, and that event has been canceled, so I will not be attending that. One of our largest events at First Baptist Church is Vacation Bible School. Vacation Bible School was originally scheduled for June 15th through the 19th. We still plan to have VBS. However, we will delay its start until sometime later in July, coronavirus permitting. Okay, so VBS is still on. We're just going to push it back a few weeks at the present time to hopefully have some things. Hopefully a lot of this will have worked through by the time we get to July. The high schoolers had a mission trip planned to the Dominican Republic for the end of June. That is still on the calendar at this moment. We're waiting to hear from the leaders involved with Hope for Haiti, which is organizing that endeavor and that trip, and working with Bo and our student leaders to make that happen. So we're waiting to hear from them, and they'll make decisions based upon what they hear from them in the near future. We had scheduled an international mission trip to Indiana, or not, Indiana's not international, is it? To Manchester, England. That is international trip to Manchester, England in July. That trip has been canceled. In addition, we had a construction team that was prepared to go to Indiana, not the international Indiana, the domestic Indiana, and they have canceled that trip to Indiana. There's also another domestic mission trip to Norristown, Pennsylvania. Its fate is currently undecided. Randy will make some decisions regarding that trip very soon. One thing that may be a bright spot in this is that our students, middle school and high school, they will have the opportunity for a mini retreat that's been added to our schedule for July 10th, 11th, and 12th at Shalimar around Panama City. And our students plan to join with another group of students from a local church here in town in Santa Rosa County in this area for a event, provided their involvement and provided we're at a point to where their involvement would not endanger their health. So that is on the calendar, obviously subject to change, but that's something we have not removed from the calendar as of yet. Our children, not students, but the children through 5th grade, they were scheduled to attend a Centra Kid camp at the end of July. However, with some conversations Lifeway has had with us, they're allowing us, if we choose to postpone that this year, they are allowing us to use the deposits we've already paid this year and apply them to next year. And so the plan at this point is to not go to Centra Kid this year, and instead, possibly around that time that Centra Kid would normally happen, that we have some type of VBS taking place around that time in July for all of our church and all of our community. So that kind of covers some things that are happening in the summer. As I kind of try to wrap some things up, let me speak for just a second about Phase 3. Because at some point we will enter Phase 1 and we'll be in Phase 1 and Phase 2, and then at some point we will enter Phase 3. When we finally enter Phase 3, you can expect many things to return to normal. For example, we plan to resume choir involvement in our morning worship once we enter Phase 3. We also plan to remove the strict or the moderate physical distancing protocols once we get to Phase 3 so that connection groups can resume and we can again gather everyone in the sanctuary for worship. Midweek activities will also resume once we enter Phase 3, but that is only once we get to Phase 3, and we will allow the data that we see in our community help us know when it's time to move to that phase. So again, I want to be very clear in saying that we cannot offer a time frame for moving from one phase to the next. We're going to monitor the data daily, and we will announce specific dates as quickly and efficiently as possible. Look, I realize that this process may not move as quickly as some of us would like it to move. As I've said before, no one wants this church campus open and back to normal operations more than I do. But we have to be careful in our re-entry so that hopefully we'll not have to re-exit. We must be careful. We must be good stewards throughout this process. We may never know if the actions we take were too much, but we will know if they were too little. And I choose to err on the side of your safety, and I'll make that choice every single time. So between now and then, whenever then is, know that we're here to provide ministry to you and to your family as best we can. I miss our church family terribly. I miss seeing you in the sanctuary. I miss interacting with you as we're able to pray for each other and to encourage each other. No one wants to see you back here more than I do. But we want you to be able to return safely, and we want you to be able to do that in a way that would honor God in the best way and would also allow us to be the good neighbors to our community that God has called us to be. So let's just slow things down. If that means we have to extend an extra week or so or 3 or 4, that's fine. Just keep tuned in to what we're doing. We will make make announcements as to every week. I plan to tell you we're still in stage whatever, or we're about to go to stage whatever. We'll make those announcements as best we can each Sunday at the end of our service, so tune in. Hope that you'll join us this coming Sunday, 10:30 a.m., as we continue our Survivor series, as we learn how to go through these seasons, not just survive, but thrive. I love you. I'm praying for you. I'm thankful to be your pastor. I look forward to seeing you soon. I look forward to seeing you online this Sunday, and hopefully when we keep moving things along, it won't be too much terribly long before we're able to see each other here at church once again. Until then, God bless you today. Hope to see you Sunday morning. Online only.